Okay, today is Saturday, July 30th, 2016, and I am talking with Donald Terry MacLeod in his home. He's 86 years old. We'll hear more about this in a minute, but born May 20th, 1930, and he's my dad. So, Dad, maybe let's just start off so that people know where we're headed with this. If you could tell me in what war you fought, for what branch of the service, and what your rank was.
During the Korean War, I spent 2 years in the United States Army as a lieutenant in the infantry. Of that, about a year was spent in Korea itself, and the other parts were in the United States. I became a lieutenant on graduation from Syracuse University because I was in the ROTC.
Okay, so when was this? Can you give me some idea on dates?
That was in June of 1952.
Okay.
I was in the ROTC for 4 years. At the end of 2 years, they gave us a choice of going into the Army or into the Air Force. The Army unit was infantry, and I chose infantry, maybe out of stupidity, I don't know, but by all of my relatives, my grandfather, my father, my great-grandfather all fought in the infantry, and so I figured I might as well continue the trend.
Okay, so hereditary, good.
Well,
on some level, maybe.
Yeah.
So let's go back maybe before we get further into the military piece. Tell me a little bit about where you were born. I already gave your birth date, but where and when and who your parents are or were, since neither of them are living anymore. And
Yeah. I was born in Queens County, New York, in a place called Astoria. My mother was Helen Terry, and my father Donald MacLeod.
Grandma's name was really Helena, though, right?
It was
With
Helen,
an A.
yes, it
yeah.
was.
Although she used Helen. She was named after
Helen.
a countess,
she
as I recall.
She sort of shortened it.
Right.
And her sister Ella also called herself Helen.
Oh, well, that's very confusing, isn't it? I didn't realize that. Okay.
My mother was a housewife, and my father was claims adjuster for the insurance industry. We lived there and in Queens County until I was 10 years old. And then we moved to Nassau County to a place called Garden City, wonderful place. And I lived there until I was 62, I guess. I had gotten married and had...
Not including your tour of duty in the Army and the time at Syracuse,
No,
I guess,
that's
right?
true. That's right. I had the
Okay.
2 years in the Army right after... matter of fact, when my class graduated from Syracuse, everybody was given a chance to either pick to be seconded to the active reserve or to volunteer for active duty. 90% of my class volunteered to, went into the reserve, and 10% of us opted for active duty immediately. The odd thing about that is there's always 3 ways to do things, they used to say in the Army: the right way, the wrong way, and the Army way. And that was evident right away. All of those who went into the active reserve were called up immediately to go into the active Army. I had to wait until October.
Well, there you go.
Which was very lucky, because at the end, when I finally got to Korea, it was about 2 months after the truce had been signed. And so my active duty in Korea wasn't combat, but it was on the front lines.
Okay, so, and you had one sibling, by the way, too, yes?
I had a brother, Douglas, who was 5 years my junior, and he also served in the United States Army.
Okay, good. All right, so you said you were at Syracuse before you entered the service. So talk to me about how you weren't drafted.
No. I actually, what happened when I enrolled at Syracuse, my father was with me and my mother, and he said, "Oh, they've got ROTC. I think it might be wise. It might be a good idea to you join up." I said, "Okay," because my father was a sergeant in the United States Army at one time, and so I signed up, and that's how Lieutenant MacLeod became.
There you go. So I think I remember a story though. If you hadn't signed up, you probably would have ended up in the Korean War anyway, right?
Probably would have been drafted. Yes, matter of fact, I did get my draft notice. I was sitting in a tent in Korea with my company commander and the executive officer. My draft notice came in, and I looked at it and I said, "Does that mean I can go home?" which got a big laugh out of both of them.
Good. That's good. Yeah. So excellent. Okay. Yes, I thought I remembered that as a story that you told before. So, can you give me a brief overview, Dad? So maybe we can organize this a little bit about sort of what happens. So you've given me a little preview on this. So it's June. You've graduated. You're entering the Army. What happens next? And give me sort of a brief, maybe overview of your time in the Army for those 2 years.
All right, I received orders to go to Fort Benning, Georgia, the infantry school, which was to teach me my trade, basically. And I spent 4 months there. The best instruction in anything that I ever got in my whole life. Absolutely wonderful, great stuff. When you go there, it's a little chilling when you see the motto of the infantry school. It says, "Follow me." And that's the way it works sometimes. I finished Fort Benning, and I received orders to go to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, to train troops. Indiantown Gap is in the western part of Pennsylvania, and the terrain there mimics that of Korea, so it was an excellent training ground for people that had to go to Korea. I actually met some of the trainees that I was training in Indiantown Gap when I got to Korea. They were in the same battalion as I was.
That's great.
And I can remember that I had one kid that had a very big butt, and he kept on sticking it up in the air when he was crawling. And I kept on telling him, "You're going to get shot in the ass if you don't pull that butt down." And this kid said, "Sir, Lieutenant," he says, "Rosenthal got shot in the fanny, just like you thought."
Should have taken your advice somehow.
Well, if he could have, I don't know. He was a little bit big. And so I spent, I'm trying to think how many months, for what, I went through that one basic training cycle. And then I guess a bunch of us were, young lieutenants were at odds and evens, and they formed a provisional battalion to go out to Las Vegas and watch an atomic bomb shot, and I was part of that. And we got on a train at pretty much, I think, State College, which is right next door, and we were traveling through the mountains of West Virginia, and all of a sudden the engine and the tender went off the tracks and into a ravine with a stream running through it, and all the cars didn't stay down the tracks actually, but didn't go into the stream, and the engineer and the fireman both jumped, and yet neither were hurt, except that the fireman broke his leg, but he broke his wooden leg, and so he really wasn't hurt. And I was in the second car, and the first car is cleaned out, but someone had to go and make sure that there was nobody there. So I went through the car and got to the end of it and looked down, and I was looking at that river. I got out of that car very fast.
I can't
Anyway,
imagine.
so we went to Nevada. The only thing after that happened, we still got another steam train. There were steam engines in those days, but believe it or not, that we used. And the only thing that happened there was the fellow that was in charge of the mess turned out to be an alcoholic and drank up all of the vanilla extract. And he sort of got relieved of that particular duty. Got to Las Vegas, and we were going to witness an atomic bomb shot off of a tower from open trenches in the desert. Now, I say view, we were in the open trenches, but we were looking at the bottom of the trench when the thing went off, and it just turned the brown sand absolutely white. I forgot to close my eyes. And once the thing went off, we could get up and saw the radiation coming out. In this particular bomb, the radiation was purple. And so that was kind of interesting. And while we were there, we wandered in the evenings where we were off to Las Vegas and into some of the casinos. And if you played one of the games there, they would these very pretty young ladies in short dresses would come around and bring you drinks, which was appealing to me and my comrades.
And were you all in uniform at the time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sure you were pretty attractive to them then too.
Perhaps, I don't know. At any rate, we found out where they went after hours, and we joined them there too.
There you go.
So we didn't get a whole lot of sleep out there, unfortunately. At any rate, I got back and I was posted to do some training of ROTC cadets at, I'm trying to think of the post, Port Eustis, Virginia. And that was.
And so when is this? Is this in October or?
No, this is now. I got to. Let's see. When did I get to Indiantown Gap? That would have been. Let's see. Probably in I think just in the end of December, I went to Indiantown Gap.
Okay.
And I was there January, February, March, April. I don't know, and until actually, and then I was in this training ROTC cadets, which is something that I had done myself. Unfortunately, I'd been trained myself one summer, and that was in the summer part of it. And then I was at that time I was dating an Army nurse at a nearby Army base, and I received my orders to go to Korea, and so I was.
So this is the summer of 1953?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in July, I guess, actually. So I, with my orders in my pocket, I was going to see her for the last time, and we were sitting in the officers' club, and there was a little radio on the back bar playing music, and it says, "We interrupt this program to announce that a truce has been signed in Korea," which was pretty much the end of July, just like it is now.
Wow. So
we had a celebration. And pretty soon I was at Seattle as the Board of Embarkation, and we got on a dependent ship, actually. It was troops and dependents. So we had a stateroom for 4 of us officers, young officers, and as we went out Puget Sound, I felt a little queasy, so I didn't go to the officers' call. Of course, I knew the officers' call was going to, assign people to the holds where all the enlisted personnel were, and it was going to be pretty much of a mess because everybody was going to get sick. I was right. The one guy in our cabin was the first lieutenant in the Signal Corps. Was designed, and he also got sick. So Lieutenant MacLeod was then assigned the largest troop hold on the ship, and but that time they had pretty well cleaned it up. So I was lucky, and we had officers and non-commissioned officers' wives traveling on this trip. So we had card games and all that sort of stuff. Pretty nice 15 days to Japan, to Yokohama. Got off the ship at Yokohama and was transferred to Sasebo, Japan. And then from Sasebo we got on an LST and went to Busan, Korea. I remember that very well because you could smell Korea before you could see it.
What was that smell like?
It
sounds bad, but just describe it to me if you would.
Well, let's face it, the fertilizer they used was all human excrement, so it smelled like that.
I got it.
Any rate, so we got to Camp Sasebo in Busan. We went into a replacement camp and ultimately got on a train which was called the KCOMZ Comet, KCOMZ being Korean Combat Zone, and it was full of bullet holes and everything else, and none of us had a weapon. And I said, what's the bullet? She said, oh, the guerrillas do that. I said, woo, and we can't shoot back, wait a minute. No, he said, don't worry, their aim is lousy. Oh, good. I was wondering if I shouldn't have had a personal pistol, but I guess it would have helped me anyway. Anyway, we got to Seoul, Yeongdeung-po, I guess it was, of course, the river from Seoul. And I was assigned to the 45th Infantry Division, which was actually a National Guard unit that had been called up. All the National Guards guys were gone. I mean, that was, but 45th Division had a sort of a Thunderbird device on its shoulder patch, and we all called it the Goonie Bird. But that was anyway, I became a platoon leader in King Company of the 179th Infantry Regiment, and then after about a month or so, Lieutenant Smith, who was the executive officer, left. Lieutenant Smith was happy to see me when I got there. He says, my turtle has arrived. In those days, the guys that were looking for replacements thought that their officer replacements were slow as turtles, and so they were called turtles.
Oh dear.
Anyway, I then became the executive officer of King Company, and because my data rank was better than Lieutenant Jones, who was the other lieutenant there, Lieutenant John Paul Jones, direct descendant.
Wow.
Great guy, wonderful guy. And meanwhile, my platoon went back to the platoon sergeant. I was really struck by my platoon originally. Sergeant Lindsay, who was the platoon sergeant, was a great big, tall, blonde-headed Swede from the Middle West someplace. And assistant platoon sergeant was Sergeant Jose E. Vega. And then we had squad leaders. And that was, first squad was Sergeant White, who was black. Then we had Sergeant Gonzalez, Sergeant Morales, and Sergeant O'Brien, but shortly thereafter that was the machine gun squad. Shortly after he left, and I made the corporal there, Sergeant Killer, full-blooded American Indian. That is America fighting, folks.
Right. That's more diverse than I thought.
Yeah.
Was that true of other units that you
I don't really know. Again, we'll say this. This have another personnel story that's kind of funny. 45th Division went home and was replaced, I think, by the 24th or the 25th Division. We had to give them all of our crew-served weapons and the vehicles and stuff. Because the 45th had been online before we arrived where we were, we had a surplus of machine guns. Supposedly there are 2 machine guns in every infantry platoon. However, the people would radio back and say, we just lost a machine gun to a Chinese 120 millimeter. And they say, okay, send us the pieces. There are no pieces for 120 millimeter, so they'd send us another machine gun. So we had about twice the number we needed. So we lined them all up in the company street, and then the guys from the 24th came along, and I said, take your pick, but you're going to have to only pick half of them. So that was interesting. I forgot something along the way here. I was talking about later on when I went from the 45th left, and I was assigned to the 2nd Division. I went back to being a platoon leader there, and when you get a platoon, the first thing you do is find out what you've got. You look at it, and I'm looking over the list of my platoon there, and there's Private MacLeod. I said, "Oh my!" So I said,
same spelling?
M-A-C,
capital L-E-O-D.
Absolutely
Okay,
the same
yeah.
spelling, everything. So I said to the platoon sergeant, "Which one is he?" And he sort of smiled and said, "There he is there. It's a great, big, tall, black kid."
Oh, wow.
And
interesting. Yeah,
so
okay.
I said, I was kind of, surprised. And I said, "What kind of a soldier is he?" He said, "Well, sir, let me tell you this. A few weeks ago, he was on guard at battalion headquarters. And we were back in reserve at that time. We were not in reserve, but he was standing there, and there was a gravel drive that had been just put in, and so as there came a Jeep up with the night headlights on, and stopped. Somebody got out, started walking on the gravel drive, and MacLeod said, 'Halt,' and the fellow halt. He says, advance 1 and been recognized. This is all Army straight stuff. And this one fellow came up and he says, 'Halt' again. He says, 'Who's there?' This fellow said, 'Captain Marvel of Division Headquarters. Captain Marvel.' He says, 'Yeah, and I'm Batman. You're on your face.'"
And the guy's name really was Marvel?
Captain Marvel of Division Headquarters.
Oh my gosh.
But he did exactly what he should have done. I said, well, he seems like a pretty good soldier.
That's good. That's great. That's funny. I don't think I'd heard that story before.
Well, and so, again, when I joined the 45th, we were in deep reserve, as far back as you can get, I think, although because the way the line the front line was constituted, on the west, the line was only about 20 miles north of Seoul, and where we were, there was a huge bulge up to the north, and so while we were in that bulge, we were about even with the front line on the west, and the only way we could get there was through a defile, one lane road through the mountains, and they had to truck stuff from the railhead. I can't remember what the name of the railhead was, but the railhead, our division rear was at railhead. That was the end of the rail line, and so we got there, and boy, I was lucky. They had already been there for about a month or two, and they had built a non-commissioned officers club out of a Quonset hut and an officers club out of a Quonset hut, and it was really nice. When I got to the officers club the first night, they said, "New men must do something to warrant their being here." And I said, "What?" He says, "Do you have a poem you can read? Do you have a story you can tell? Can you sing?" I said, "I'll sing." And so I sang him, "Get out of the way for old Dan Tucker, too late to get his supper. Supper's over, dinner's cooking. Old Dan Tucker just stand there looking." And I did a few other verses, but that was it. That was my initiation to the 3rd Battalion of the 179th.
I assume you got a significant amount of applause for that.
Well, nobody threw rocks.
There you go.
The only other strange thing that happened there was I was there for maybe a week. Then we were at the officers club waiting to to eat, and there was a group down at the very end, and they said, "Anybody play bridge here?" So I had played bridge in college. So I said, "Yeah, I play bridge." He says, "Come on down here, we need a 4th." So I went down, and there I am playing partners with the colonel. Well, I'm a little second lieutenant, this is the colonel. And I don't remember how we did, but I do know that he never asked me to play again. So he must have found somebody else. So that was my remembrances of the 45th Division. When I arrived at the 2nd, they were also in reserve, but not for very long. We went online, and Sergeant, I should say, I go back a little bit. Sergeant Lindsay was my platoon sergeant in the 45th, and very, very excellent soldier. I wanted desperately to have him to stay in the Army because he's just what the Army needed. And he said no, he's going to join with his brother and do form a construction firm in the Midwest. And he, but to give you an idea how cool and calm and collected he was, I was told this story by somebody that I absolutely trust. First of all, we have to identify the first sergeant, the top non-commissioned officer in the battalion, in the company. That was Sergeant. Can't think of it. Anyway, can't remember his name right now. But he was, while Lindsay was tall, and this guy was short and built like a New York City fire plug, and had been an ex desk sergeant. I'll get his name yet. At any rate, he and Lindsay were online just before they came offline to where we were, and just before the end of hostilities. And our first sergeant was sitting on his helmet in the back, with his back in the back of the trench, eating off of a tray. On the front lines, you could eat off trays. When you get to the outpost line, we used mess kits. At any rate, he's sitting there, and next to him is a bag full of grenades hanging on the back of the trench. And then there was Lindsay leaning up against the fence, like the thing with his arm on the back of the trench. And all of a sudden, 120 round came in, and a piece of shrapnel flew down that trench line, knocked the bottom of the bag of grenades out, and embedded itself underneath Lindsay's arm. And the first sergeant dived on the ground, his meal all over his face. And Lindsay said, "Too late now, Mitchell." That's his name, is Mitchell. "Too late now, Mitchell. One of them is going to go off. It's going to go off." That's how cool he was.
Wow.
Great, wonderful soldier. The other great remembrance I hear is that when I became executive officer of King Company, I became the supply officer as well. Never done that before in my life. So I went with the supply sergeant, and he says, we talked about how things were going, and he had a supply clerk there, a corporal. He said, "We're going up to a regiment to requisition some stuff, Lieutenant. You want to come with us?" I said, "Sure." So we got in his Jeep, and I sat in the death seat there, and the corporal sat in the back. And we get up there, and we had a trailer behind the Jeep. And I got out with the sergeant, and the corporal was staying there. I said, "What's he going to do?" He says, "Don't. I'll tell you later." So, okay. So we walked in, and the sergeant starts talking with the regimental sergeant, supply sergeant. "Yeah, this way, that way," gossips, all kinds of stuff, And then finally he orders some stuff, and more talk. Finally we get all the stuff that we're supposed to requisite, and we meet outside. And there's the corporal, and the trailer is partially full. And I said, "What's going on here?" He says, "Well, sir, when you and I were beguiling that sergeant in there, Corporal Jones here was rolled over the back of the tent flap and was requisitioning his own stuff." I said, "Let's get out of here."
Oh my gosh.
The Army way. That's great stuff. Well, anyway, when we got to the second, we went online for a while, and then to the outpost line. The main line of resistance, what you call the defensive.
Talk to me a little bit about, there's a truce, right? And one thing I don't understand as somebody who doesn't do military stuff is talk to me about how the lines work, especially after there's a truce. What is this like?
When the truce was signed, the lines were agreed upon, and so that's where they were and they stayed that way. It still is, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know. We were at that time had been in a defensive position basically during the war. We weren't trying to take over North Korea or anything. We were just trying to defend South Korea. and so our trench line was very good, but uh, the main line, people call it the main line. Well, the main line consists of a bunch of lines, actually. There's the reserve line, there's the light line, first of all. You can't, vehicles cannot shine their lights after you hit that line.
Oh, okay.
And so it's a little dangerous in those hilly roads, or mountainous roads, actually. Then there's reserve line, then there's the main line of resistance. That's what people might call the front line. And then in front of that is the outpost line. The outpost line is sort of a trigger for that any invading force will hit that first, and it gives the main line shine to make sure that they're ready, essentially.
And what is the topography like? I mean, is this sort of jungle, or
It's
describe
mountains.
to me? It's
Mountains that have
and
been scarred by artillery fire and everything, so there's hardly anything growing on them.
okay.
Yeah, probably have nice undergrowth now, but anyway, so we were on the main line. We went to the outpost line, and I was told at the time, in command of the largest outpost in Korea, supposedly 120 men. And the company is only 200, so I was, but not all of them were infantry. We had forward observer parties from DIV, that's Division Artillery, Corps Artillery, Army Artillery, 20mm mortars. They were all in one place, and so, but we were there to protect them and also make it as a warning situation. We got there, and it's a low range of hills, and we're staring at the Chinese, the mountains in front of us. We knew they were the Chinese because we had taken prisoners on line crossers when we were on the main line. 3 kids, they're just kids like our kids, had deserted, and one of them had brought his squad leader burp gun as a token that he was trying to give us, he was trying to do something that would make sure that he would be accepted, I guess. And we had 3 guys that could speak Chinese, but none of them spoke their languages. I mean, their particular dialect. So we, as the battalion intelligence officer at that time, that was later on, I should say. I was interested in learning something about what their unit was, etc., how morale was, all that business. No way. And so I guess actually no, that was before I was the Battalion 3. Anyway, I had graduated from this outpost of 120 to become battalion staff, but before that, they came up and said, would you like to, first of all, our minefields were behind us, and so they brought me up. They said, do you want me to show you the path through the minefield? And I said, what is it kind of? He says, yeah, it goes this way, that way. I said, don't bother. We're never going to get to use that if somebody comes after us. We were in a situation where it was a do or die, and that was it. We could always go down the road, but that was all. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of interesting. While we were there, I guess a funny thing happened. My predecessor at this position had burnt down his little tent, and so they didn't have a tent for the commanding officer. I slept in the camo tent, which is in defilade, just behind where a machine gun position was. Defilade is now the reverse slope of a hill, so away from the enemy. And the camo tent, there was radios and the television. Not the radios and telephones. We had telephone connection with all of the other people and all the artillery people, all that sort of stuff. And we used to run the lines every night, every morning, I should say. And we'd come across where the Chinese had listened in. Now, we knew the Chinese because our camo wire is black, and the Chinese camo wire is brown. So when they respliced, they had to use their wire.
That's interesting. So
yeah. So
these lines were above ground. So
yeah, they were.
Okay.
Yeah, right. I mean, this was no sense in digging them. And, you know,
Right.
at any rate, so anyway, one night we were understaffed. We were supposed to have 120 men and had 80, and our company commander refused to give me any more. Second, he wouldn't modify the patrol demands that we have. In other words, you must have 8 men in this patrol. So we were all very tired, and I was in bed. It was now winter time, and all of a sudden, the machine gun just on the reverse slope of the hill there went off twice. Bang! With 2 bursts. Out of bed, put my boots on, get my cartridge belt, grab my carbine, grab my steel helmet. Out we go. And I'm right there, and I said, "What happened?" He says, "Oh, sir, we thought we saw some movement over down there." Now, I don't know that this is a fact, but I'm pretty darn sure what happened. The light machine gun trigger isn't pulled; it's raised. And it's the middle of winter. We have heavy gloves on, and I think this fella, so all of a sudden, fell asleep, and the machine gun went off. Boom, 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 boom. And I said, "All right, looks like whatever it was is gone, so let's all get back and get some sleep here." And I turned, and there was my messenger with my bulletproof vest. I looked down, and I don't have any trousers on. I'm in my long john. What a commanding officer!
No protection and no clothing, right? So no protection
But
of two kinds.
but I had my weapons.
So this is the winter of 53, 54. This is
Yes, yeah.
So that
Yeah.
time frame. Okay, when all this is happening. All right. So you said next you ended up in battalion staff, or is there something more
Yeah,
we should...
they wanted a new battalion assistant 2, which assistant 3, which there are in the Army. The staff functions are numbered. And so 3 is plans and training, 2 is intelligence, 1 is personnel, and 4 is supply, I think. They might be reverse in that, but and so they wanted our battalion 3 was going to be rotating home in a couple of months. So they wanted an assistant there so that when the new one came in, he might probably be a captain or so. I'd be able to brief him and show him where all the stuff was and that. But fortunately for me, or unfortunately for Lieutenant Paz, I guess his name was, he there's a book called a patrol book. We used to use anyway. They may do something different now, but and used to write down, log in all the patrols that were going to be going on during that 24-hour period, and he forgot to do that. And so we had at battalion staff headquarters, battalion headquarters, and all of a sudden had somebody setting off trip flares and explosions behind us. And we thought, uh-oh, some Chinese patroller got himself lost and now was trying to get back to where we were supposed to be going. Nobody was there. We had, the battalion staff officers, cooks and bakers, and supply clerk, supplies, and that was it. So, but we sort of fanned out, made a circle, and with 2 guys. And I was with Lieutenant Hofberg, who who luckily spoke German. Anyway, so we going along, and all of a sudden these devices are going off, and pretty soon they were just in front of our position. And so I was about to challenge, because we could hear voices. So I said, Alfred says, Don, let me do it. I said, okay. He says, Wie gehen Sie? And so we got a stream of Dutch coming back. It was a Dutch patrol. We had the Dutch battalion. And I said, tell him to shine a light on his face. So as I came out, it was right over my front sight. Thank you, Lieutenant Huffberg.
Wow.
Our S2 was gone the next day, and I became the new S2.
Wow, that's that must have been. I mean, how did that make you feel? You must have been frightened. I mean, there must be many times where you were frightened.
Well,
by things,
I don't know that I was no, the adrenaline starts to flow. I mean, that's it. That's what got me out of the bed and in my long johns to see what's going on.
Right.
I mean, you don't, and there the adrenaline was going here too. We're about set to fight. Thank you. Don't remember ever being scared. Just, well, this is what happens here, kind of a thing. So those were the, I guess, the big deals that in my term in Korea.
So is that? Did you leave after you were Battalion 2, or
Battalion 2? That was my last job in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, I was. Well, I have another crazy story. After you're there for a while, when somebody new came in, they always ask, "Were you here when they were shooting at each other?" And my answer was, "No. When they heard I was coming, they quit." Wise guy stuff. We got a new battalion commander, a hotshot major. They had passed over 2 lieutenant colonels to make this guy our battalion commander. Very sharp guy, absolutely. And I was the S2, and I was showing him around the traps and all that stuff we had. And he said, "Well, Lieutenant, were you here when they were shooting at each other?" I said, "No, sir. When they heard I was coming, they quit." He says, "Really? Which side?"
That's good.
I said, "Sir, I'll never use that story again," and I never did.
He was pretty sharp.
He was a sharp guy, very sharp.
So when was it then that you? When was it that you moved to the battalion staff, and then when was it that you ended up leaving Korea?
Well,
roughly?
I'm trying to. I really don't know I guess I was. Time for me to I had a 2-year shot, and so it was very near to October in '54 that or 53, I guess.
No, it would have been 54.
Yeah,
You
say
started
52,
in 52.
53, 54. I got to Korea in '53. Yeah. No. Yes, in '53, and then 54 would be. So I got my orders, and they had a party for me, and they always surprised me. They had put me in for a Bronze Star, but they couldn't give it. The Bronze Star wouldn't be given because I wasn't there when they were shooting at each other. So I got myself a different medal. I don't know what it's called anymore. Actually, it's a green. I call it the Green Hornet.
Do you still have it?
Yeah, oh sure.
Okay, well we can go check that out.
All right, and then we got to again back to Yokohama Harbor ultimately. And
so did you take the train back again? Did you do exactly in reverse what you did to get there?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think I'm trying to think where we came from was just north of Seoul, and I think we just trucked into Seoul, and we got on one of the Army transports and landed in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Then we got put on the ship, same size ship as we came in, but not a dependent ship. Had the same size stateroom for 12 guys. All of our gear shoved in the middle. But it was 15 good days getting home. And then I left there and...
So this, and so where did you report in the United States? Where did you get back to Seattle again, or?
Yeah, I think it was Seattle. I really don't remember now, actually, but I think it was there. Yeah, that would be the port. That's the port of embarkation. Though.
And did you? Maybe I didn't ask you this on the way there, or maybe I didn't. I don't remember hearing how you got from where you were to Seattle.
I flew.
Okay.
The Army.
And where were you before Seattle? I'm trying to remember now. Were you at Fort Benning?
That
Still
was
no?
not in Indiantown Gap, but that was in. Trying to think of the name of the fort. It's in New Jersey. Anyway, it was.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of it right now. And the Army gets you a ticket.
Okay.
They pay the freight. And I was. I guess I was then flown to Fort Dix, and I was discharged at Fort Dix.
Okay.
I mean, not discharged, but released from active
Decommissioned.
duty.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I spent 6 years in the reserve, and then I was no longer in the Army.
Okay. So when you get back to Fort Dix, is anybody meeting you there, or what's the welcoming home thing?
Nothing.
How does it? Nothing.
Zero. Well.
So you get into Fort Dix. How did you then go back to Garden City? How did you then?
Yeah, I went back to Garden City.
Okay. So took a train or took a?
Yeah, took a train.
Okay.
Long Island Railroad.
Yeah. All right.
And then I applied for a job at Marsh & McLennan Incorporated, and I got that. And I was there for 39 years.
And did you ever reconnect with that nurse that you were dating
Never
before
did.
you
Never
left?
did. Didn't answer.
Okay.
I mean, again.
Did she write to you when you were?
No.
Okay.
When the war ended, when the truce was signed, we never thought that the truce would last very long. It was sort of nice as a hiatus, but we figured that the North Koreans would make enough noise and nastiness, so they'll do something again. I think maybe the Chinese they're a little bit smarter than that. I never, as far as I know, I never faced the North Koreans across. It was always the Chinese that fought against. We were lined up against. The Chinese were at the prime invasion point of South Korea. It's the Imjin River, comes down from the north, and makes sort of a hook like this and comes down. And when I was on the outpost, I was up by the on the other side of the Imjin River. So our line went across the Imjin, and that's just a corridor to Seoul. Been there once before in reserve when I was in the 45th. We went, the Chinese, the 5th Rock Division was pulled out of reserve to go fight guerrillas. And our battalion, actually our regiment, was put in place of them. And so I took half of the company and the first sergeant, and we went down and converted a rice paddy into a place where we could put tents. That involved taking rocks out of the nearby river and throwing them into the rice paddy and killing them, ruining the rice paddy, unfortunately. But and there we were right on what's called the MSR, the main supply route, and we were a straight shot down the valley for the Chinese. We had a little position that stuck out. I thought, good Lord, what an exposed position! But this was King Company. So the other companies were further inland, and they didn't have the same kind of problems we had. We had a lot of prostitute problems, and they could walk on the road and everything, and they would come in and we'd catch them, and we were trying to keep our guys, from having any disease.
Safe and healthy, right? Yeah, exactly.
And so I told the first sergeant, I said, okay, we catch them, take one of their shoes, this is now winter time, and put it up on pegs on our bulletin board, and then let them go. So we had about 6 or 7 shoes there, and then pretty soon the Wilk girls decided maybe they wanted to keep their shoes.
That's incredible. That was a smart idea, actually. Nice way to sort of put a
What
halt
else
to that
we
kind of
could
thing.
have done, you know, you can't hurt them, you can't beat them, I think it's crazy.
No, and you can't lock them up. So.
There you go.
Well, we've got a few minutes left here, and I realized I forgot to introduce myself, which I was supposed to do at the beginning of the video. So maybe the way we can close out this first hour is I'll say that I am Joan Marie MacLeod Hemingway, your daughter. You know, I said up front you were my dad, and that I have 2 siblings, one of whom lives here near your home, my brother Donald Terry MacLeod Jr., and then my sister, who's out in Los Angeles, Susan Louise MacLeod, and our mom, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, on this earth, Joan Hilder Marsh MacLeod, was your wife, who you didn't meet for maybe 5 years after you got back. I
was probably, when we
29
got married,
or so? You were 30.
I was just 30 when we got married.
That's what I thought.
So I probably met her when I was 28.
Yeah, or 28, okay.
I'm 29, yeah.
Yeah, so you dated, I guess, for a few years, because you were 24 probably when you came back, right?
Yeah.
So, 54.
Has to do, I think, with mindset. You asked before whether I was afraid. What you do is you think it all through. Realize that you're in a situation where you're in a dangerous situation, and make peace with whatever you can, and then you hell around. Figure maybe I'm not going to do this for very long, so at least I'll have some fun doing it, and that sort of carries over once you get out. So I was doing that until I met Joan, my wife. And all of that ceased. Well, we still did some helling around, but we did it together.
Exactly. And then you settled down. And
yes, we did.
You had the 3 kids in 5
children.
years.
That'll settle you down.
That's, yeah, well, either that or there's something wrong going on in the household. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, good. Well, why don't we end it there for today, and then
Okay.
we can pick up with maybe some more details on some of those events tomorrow,
Sure.
if that makes sense. Okay.